It's more accessible, it's easier to find the information.
And you get announcements of recent news happening around the world.
Just catching up general news, what's best and what's new.
What is the role that newspapers or magazines are playing in your life? Reading material? Ornaments? Wallpaper? Or just trash that you throw away? Do you usually read newspapers or magazines?
No.
No.
I don't read newspapers, no.
No, it's old news.
Not regularly.
I did, but not anymore.
Not really.
No.
Why? Because it's kind
like
of
an
boring.
old-fashioned thing.
Times are changing, and paper media is not a necessity anymore. More and more people treat it as a foundling of the times. I have made a questionnaire on SurveyMonkey, which is about the audiences of British paper media. 65 people have participated in the survey. Only 13.12% of them still read newspapers and magazines as part of their daily routine, compared to 59.02% before. I was shocked by the wastage rate in the audiences of paper media. According to the ABC for March 2015, no British national newspaper increased print sales year on year in March. The Daily Mirror leads the red top market in comparative terms, with sales dropping 6.7% year on year.
Sales have definitely dropped. We have noticed a major difference in the last 10 years or so. From a student population, the sales are down to at least, we've lost 90%, we're down to 10% of what they used to be. As I say, the sales have dramatically dropped.
It's absolutely undeniable that at the moment the print operation, both in newspapers and magazines, are probably facing some of the toughest challenges for, well, a generation, perhaps more. There have been large-scale cutbacks in the numbers of publications, and that's had a really big impact on jobs. There have been lots of jobs lost.
German business newspaper The Financial Times Deutschland is to close after piling up €250 million of losses during its 12 years on the newsstand. The paper has a circulation of 100,000, but never made a profit. As many as 330 people are set to lose their jobs.
Tribune Company, owner of the LA Times and the Chicago Tribune, filed for bankruptcy protection to restructure its debt.
The paper's owner, E.W. Scripps Company, closed the Pulitzer Prize-winning paper to the shock of the paper's staff and readers. The 150-year-old Rocky was Colorado's first newspaper and the state's oldest continually operated business.
In the halls of history, paper media has always had a high reputation. Newspapers force the government and companies to take responsibility. They usually set the agenda for other media. Paper media could change the order or even change the world. Now it seems like yesterday. On August 9th, 1974, Nixon announced live on TV his resignation from the White House. Two Washington Post journalists, Bob Woodward and Carl Bernstein, had made an in-depth investigation. It is their report that made Nixon resign.
Therefore, I shall resign the presidency effective at noon tomorrow.
Considering its former reputation, what caused the paper media crisis?
The idea of a Watergate scandal, which is one of the most famous political investigations that have ever been, which brought down a president and a whole administration, was quite extraordinary. It illustrated a couple of things. What it illustrated really was the capacity for a famous newspaper to allow two of its senior reporters the time and the resources to carry out a major newspaper investigation, and that is an expensive thing to do. But if you don't have a well-resourced newspaper, if it lacks money, then it doesn't have the resources to allow reporters to do that kind of work. Advertising revenue streams have dried up, so that advertising that print carried in big volumes and which generated a lot of revenue have stopped. Some of this is because the audience for print has declined. There are fewer people reading print publications. But the other big reason is that advertisers have changed the way that they advertise because of the arrival of the internet and the opportunities that there are online to advertise.
According to Statista, UK digital advertising overtook television advertising in 2010 and now receives the greatest share of advertising spending. The internet's share of advertising spending is expected to increase to almost 44.2% by 2015, with newspapers losing its share of expenditure and falling to 13%. Social media advertising spending grew in 2014 to exceed £920 million. So why do advertisers like the internet so much?
They can go online and they do not have to pay as much as they would have to pay a traditional print operation, and also the audience can be very big. It can also be quite a specialised way of advertising.
Advertising, not only that, they can measure much more efficiently how their money spent on advertising is giving them a return. So it's much easier to measure how many people are clicking on an ad than trying to understand, well, how many readers are looking at this in a newspaper, how many people are actually then going to my shop and buying the good. It's much more difficult to measure effectiveness of advertising in print compared to online.
Technology and the internet seem to be the largest killers of paper media. People are more and more attached to the convenience and fast speeds of the internet. They cannot wait to put paper media into the bin of history.
I get the information of the internet usually.
I think it's because of the technology. We can find anything by the phone, so we don't need to buy everything in the internet.
I don't have time. I just check the internet occasionally.
It's just so much like negative stuff going on nowadays. There's never anything positive that makes you feel enlightened. It's just like dark stuff all the time and quite a lot of depressing stuff that you always read. So just there's no point really. It's better just to Google what you want to know about instead, so you don't have to see all the bad stuff.
Because it's instant. You learn instantly what's happened. With the newspaper you have to wait a day, something like that. So and with the internet you get a lot of resources, different sources of information.
It's more internet, I would say, these days, definitely. More kind of news apps. It's quicker, it's shorter, it's more concise. You can process a lot of information quicker, I think, and it's at your fingertips as well.
Internet, yeah, if I can, yes. It's more up to date, and you get announcements of recent news happening around the world, you know, so if anything's happening suddenly, then you get it within a few minutes on the internet, whereas you have to wait for the newspaper for the next day, really.
What I always tell people, if you want to know what's happening in the world today, at this present moment in time, you get your phone out. A newspaper will tell you and report on what happened yesterday, and that's the difference.
The internet audience is increasing every second, while that of paper media is decreasing every day. According to Statista, the use of paper media in Britain has fallen to 54% in 2014 from 78% in 2005.
It became possible to view stories and to get information online very quickly and free. And that's a huge challenge. For a newspaper presents news, but you must buy it. There's a price for it.
Younger generations just don't have necessarily the same patience to pick up a newspaper and read. I think literacy levels have changed. I'm not saying that we're less literate, but I think as consumers we consume news in much smaller bite-sized chunks. We don't want to read a long feature. We don't have the same attention span. So I think that's been part of the picture as well. And then the economics too. It's much cheaper and easier for people to publish online than it is to set up a newspaper or a print magazine. So that means that it's much easier to compete in that space, and newspapers and magazines are struggling really to compete with those newer threats.
Many of them will say, oh, it's about digital, it's about online access to, but they were always in the business of telling us what was going on, of information, of analysis, of comments and commentary, and in terms of helping us to make sense of the world around us. You don't have to do that just on newspaper. There are lots of ways to do it. If they feel they're in the business of just selling newspapers, then they're making a mistake about what their business is. I think part of the problem, a large part of the problem, certainly in the regional newspapers, local newspapers, has been really bad management. They thought they were cash cows. They could sit there and take an awful lot of money out of what they saw as a declining business, and many of them didn't start investing in that business until it was a bit late in the day. So some of them are doing a good job now, pulling it back, but bad management has been a big part of the problem.
We are young, but newspapers are old, just like an old man on the edge of death. But will newspapers really die?
No, it'll be different. Lots of people still will buy newspapers because they are excellent things to carry around and sit and pull out of your pocket and read. They tell us things in different ways to what we find on the internet. Magazines, there's always going to be a market for really good magazines that help to inform and entertain us. Good newspapers, good magazines, they won't be selling as many in print, but they will be selling them. And because they are valuable objects, because they are nice things to have, they'll probably be charging a lot more for them than they do now. And I think people will be prepared to pay more for them than perhaps we do now.
1.6 million buy the Daily Mail, okay, every day. Just short of 1 million people buy the Daily Mirror. And more than 2 million people buy The Sun, which is the biggest selling newspaper in Britain. Now, it's generally regarded that a single newspaper in a household will probably be read by 2 to 3 people. The Sun sold 2 million papers today, but in fact, probably nearly 6 million people read it. That's a lot of people still who are buying newspapers physically and reading them.
From my survey, there are still many people who buy newspapers and magazines. Most of them are senior citizens. More than 60% of them spend more than 30 minutes in a typical day reading a newspaper.
People who still buy newspapers are basically your older people. People who've been, I would say, in excess of about 50 years old and above. People who aren't used to modern technology. People who have always bought a newspaper, and they will still religiously buy papers until the day they die.
For senior citizens, reading newspapers is still a major leisure activity. They enjoy sitting in the square, reading their newspapers in the sunshine.
I like to feel it and see it and read the print and look at where it's been laid out.
I like the newspaper.
Why?
Because I haven't got the internet for a start. And I don't use it. But it's easy to get, easy access to the shop. They sell them, buy, take it, breakfast, read the paper, pass the time of the day with.
Also, there are still many people who like the work of paper media.
I think sub-editing is one of my favorite jobs because when the first time I saw it, I feel like it is like I put all the puzzles together and make it into a very beautiful picture. And for me, it is really interesting, and I really want to be a sub-editor in the future.
Paper media is not dead yet. It has a lot of advantages that others don't have. Paper media is still playing a key role. Deep and reliable information.
One of the characteristics of newspapers is exactly what I've just said. They like to have new things. They like to break the news, we would say. They like to discover it. And the other organisations you've named tend not to do that.
What I do worry about is the quality of news. So newspapers for me have always been the source of the highest quality investigative journalism, for instance. Some broadcasters try and do investigative reporting, but they haven't really got the same expertise or experience or resources that newspapers traditionally have for that kind of reporting. That would be my worry if we were to see some of our big newspapers like the Times, Guardian, Independent, if we were to see them disappear, I would worry about losing some of that investigative reporting because right now I don't really see anyone else doing it in any kind of depth.
It's difficult for other media to get to the depth. I mean, the Rocky is known for the hard-hitting investigations, for the stories that get to the bottom of the serious questions that the people who live here have.
Challenging authority and orders.
It is a great way to challenge the established order, to hold politicians and institutions accountable in a way that other organisations don't do. I think that if newspapers do decline, then that kind of journalism will become rarer, and that's a bad thing, especially in democracies. We need people who will champion and challenge and hold people to account. Otherwise, abuses happen.
The mark of identity.
Sometimes newspapers and magazines can act as an accessory. People like to be seen with a newspaper or a magazine. So, for instance, just recently in Scotland, when Scotland held its referendum for independence, there was a new newspaper launched called The National, and it was very pro-independence. It was for Scottish independence, and they chose to have a print version, that it was important to have a physical product, a physical newspaper that people could go into the shop and buy, fold up and put under their arm and walk around and be seen holding this newspaper, because for them it was a way of telling their friends and other people, I support independence. I buy this newspaper, which means I'm supporting independence. So I think there is a place for newspapers and magazines as almost badges, symbols, accessories that identify the reader with either a cause or a way of thinking or maybe an income level. So I think there will still be a place for newspapers and magazines, print versions, but it will be a small proportion of what they do.
How can the paper media industry continue to survive?
Pearson, a UK-based publisher, sold its Financial Times newspaper and other publishing assets to Nikkei for $1.32 billion.
So why, in such declining circumstances, do some newspapers, like the Financial Times, still have high value?
There are many things that are interesting about the Financial Times. It has a fantastic reputation for the quality and standard of its financial journalism, which is regarded as being impartial and authoritative, which are very important things for any journalist to have, that it is not biased, but it's very good at what it does. So it's well respected. That's a fantastic thing to have. And it has a great team of journalists doing a wonderful job in their field.
people don't come looking necessarily for a piece of paper or something online. They come for news, they come for analysis, they come for incisive commentary. That's what they look to news organisations for. So I think it's really important. I think the organisations that will survive will be the ones that reinvest in quality journalism. I don't think the critical decision will be, should we be online or should we be print? I think the critical decision will be, can we afford to invest in quality journalism? And then after that, the decisions will flow.
High quality content is one reason for the survival of print media. According to my questionnaire survey, 71.67% of the readers care about the quality of the content of newspapers and magazines.
The other thing that they've been able to do is that they've been able successfully to create an online newspaper, an online version of the Financial Times. And that is because it is a niche that the Financial Times has occupied very successfully. And it said to people, well, you know, you no longer have to buy the physical manifestation of the paper, you can come online and subscribe.
Every famous newspaper in Britain has its own electronic edition.
The good business model to look at in terms of making money is the Daily Mail. And the Daily Mail is profitable. The Daily Mail is an example of a newspaper that has successfully created an online business, a massive online business, the biggest in the world. The Daily Mail's website is the biggest English language news website in the world. It's bigger than the New York Times. Massive numbers of people look at it every day. And that is a British newspaper that was unknown, really, in places like America and Australia, where its audiences are now growing. That's a successful model. But the marvellous thing, the amazing thing, was that how it was able to transform itself from a middle class, mid-market British national into a global brand. And he did that because of the website, because it discovered this fantastic formula of news, world news, but also celebrity news. If you're interested in celebrity news, you will have to look at the Daily Mail website because it does celebrity news brilliantly. And what happened was that young people began to look at this because they like to see their news online rather than in print. And suddenly the audience grew and grew, and the Daily Mail was able to grow its staff. So now it has hundreds of reporters working for it online across the world. And as it does that, it's able to get more stories and more celebrity stories and tell people about it. And therefore it's become very popular. It's a great formula that they've hit on. The newspaper and the website are very different from each other. They have the same masthead, the same branding, but in fact the Mail online is quite a different product to the newspaper. It's very clever the way that they've done it.
Transforming for the internet is a common and effective way that modern traditional newspaper media might take. In Newcastle, some local newspapers and magazines, such as Narc magazine, have published online editions.
Well, we did expand onto the internet. We started a website about a year ago, about 9 months ago. So we kind of had to, because the internet is so important, and people get so much of their news and their information through the internet. So I would always produce a print magazine because it's what I like and what I love. The website is a really valuable tool for us to be able to say even more than we currently do with the magazine. So we can cover much more sort of content, we can talk about more people, and you know, this is only 56 pages, you know, and we can't cram it all in, so the internet helps us to do extra content. So it's a great thing to do, but my love is always in printed magazines.
The reason why the internet can attract audiences is because it's free. People will never reject a free dinner. Now there are many free newspapers on the market, and they have high circulations.
In total, it prints about 1.3 million, almost 1.4 million copies a day, and its readership is estimated as about 3.3 million. So behind the Sun and the Daily Mail, it's the third biggest national newspaper, if you like, in Britain.
On a July morning, I visited some metro stations to see why the metro is so hot. Almost every station has metro boxes. It's almost 7:30 and people are heading for work. Many people take a metro newspaper. More people read the Metro newspaper than use their cell phones to surf the internet. As a free newspaper, why is Metro so popular?
Because most people like something free, don't they?
It's a free paper. It's not too political, it's not left-wing or right-wing, it's very in the middle. It's colourful, it's easy to read, and it's not too big.
Passes the time, I suppose. I don't think I would read it for any well, groundbreaking news or groundbreaking journalism, but it's a good paper to pass some time, I think.
It's not necessarily my first choice of read, but when there's nothing better to do on a bus, it's interesting to just have a read through.
Well, it tells you all the local news for Newcastle and just little stories, so it's just good to find things out about where you live.
Some of the pages will be different to the ones you pick up in Sheffield or in Bristol or somewhere else. So it gives local information, and that also means it can appeal to local advertisers. If it's just a national newspaper, then maybe a company in Newcastle isn't going to spend a lot on advertising if people in Sheffield and Birmingham and Bristol are reading it. So that's a useful model economically and business models. As a newspaper, it tends to give a fairly rich mix of serious news and celebrity news. If you look at it, you'll find the celebrity section in the centre. There are some interesting features. It gives interesting reporting on science matters and such like, and on health and well-being. And it also covers serious news. So as a model of a newspaper, in business terms, in journalistic terms, it's not bad.
Will free newspapers be a good solution for the paper media industry?
You have to work out how you're going to do it. If you just leave them in cafes and pubs and coffee shops for people to pick up, then you don't know how many people are picking them up, which is difficult. The way the Metro works is really interesting because it works where you have a big metro system. That's why it was called that, I think, you know. So when you have hundreds of thousands of people, or maybe millions of people every day using the metros and the buses in a particular area, then you have got that captive audience. And the paper is structured for them. It's very carefully designed so that the stories are ones you can read in a very short time. If you're getting on the bus and getting off 10, 15 minutes later, you want to be able to go through it quite quickly. So it offers a mix of quite short stories, so you can get a lot of information about a lot of things very quickly, and some slightly longer features, a page or two features. So if you've got a longer journey, you can sit and read that. That's useful. The other free newspapers, the local ones, which came before the Metro, they were delivered house by house. So they went to each door and people put them to the door. So again, they could say, we have delivered these papers to so many thousand houses, so many thousand homes. And then they also knew who that audience was. They knew who they were because they were taking them to their houses. So I think you need that kind of structure in place. Just leaving them around and hoping people will pick them up is a bit less useful.
There are some other options.
The only advice would be the price, not to make it too expensive, and people will still continue to buy.
I think knowing your audience is probably really important. For a while we tried to talk about all different sorts of music, everything from folk to heavy metal, and we realised that you can't be all things to all people all the time. So we have our niche, and we like to talk about the things we talk about, and our readers like those things too. So we've tried not to cover everything. I think that's quite important. I think it's good just to always try and challenge our readers and show them something new and interesting, and that keeps me interested and excited about my job, and just being nice to people a lot of the time. Trying to look for things, for new exciting acts in the Northeast is something that's really important for me.
Newspapers will be supported in lots of different ways. It's not just going to be through advertising. It might be through a subscription. It might be because they own other businesses as well, and they use the profits from those other businesses to pay for the news operation and to pay for their providing the paper. It might be because they've got other things as well. So newspapers are also, if you look, selling holidays. They're inviting people to join clubs like wine clubs and gardening clubs and such like. They're trying to reach people in lots of different ways and get people to, and provide a service that's not just about giving information, that people are prepared to pay for.
As a product form, paper media is going through a severe digital winter. But if winter comes, could spring be far behind?